after we complete the framing, the home now takes on two identities. You've got the interior of the home and you've got the exterior of the home. Weather permitting, you can go like gangbusters on the exterior. Now that you have a roof on the home, you can work on the interior. Because I cannot talk about two places at the same time, we're going to go ahead and talk about the exterior. And when we complete this, we'll come back and talk about the interior. But understand that both areas are taking place simultaneously. So the next section we're going to get into is the exterior construction. After the framer completes the framing of the home, you now want to get your roofer out there and they will install felt on the roof, or what some of you may call tar paper or roofing paper. Some builders will have the framing carpenter do this. I have found that it works out a little bit better to just go ahead and hire the roofer to do this. I think you get a little bit better job. And on the felt, a lot of builders will put what is called 15-pound felt on the roof. Now, I'm going to recommend that you do things a little different than a lot of builders do. And by saying that, what I mean is 15-pound felt is fine if you're going to quickly roof the home in just a few days, or at least less than a week. But if it's going to take more than a week before you put the shingles up there, 15-pound felt is not going to hold up very good. You know, the weather's going to take its toll on it. Wind will rip it up, and you'll probably have to replace or repair a bunch of it before you put the shingles up there. For that reason, because the way I'm going to tell you to build this home, you're not going to put the shingles on right now, and there's a method to my madness. Your big production builders, they go ahead and put the shingles on immediately because they may not run into some of the problems you'll run into building a custom home for yourself. So because it's going to take more than a week before you put the shingles up there, I recommend you spend the additional money and go with 30-pound felt. And the 30-pound felt is going to hold up really, really good until you get the shingles up there. Now, we went through a stage for a while where the builders were not putting any felt on the roof. Don't do that. I mean, even 15-pound felt, it's only like something like $15 a roll. One roll covers 432 square feet. Not only is it going to protect your decking until you get the shingles up there, but it's a great backup system if you ever have a shingle blow off in the future. And understand that a lot of your roof manufacturers will not honor any guarantee on their roofing unless you have the felt underneath the roofing. So put the felt up there. If you get tempted to leave it off, don't. And I don't want to scare you or anything like this, but I think if you don't put the felt up there, you're running the risk of dying and burning in hell, and it's just not worth it. So put the felt on the roof. Now, of course, we're talking about standard roofing. If you're going to be doing anything like tile roofing or slate or a metal roof or something like this, you're going to need to do a little homework and find out some of the requirements for the type of roof you're going to use. But we're talking about standard shingles, fiberglass shingles. A lot of your roofers or even carpenters, if they put the felt up, they may tack it down with roofing nails, or they'll just staple it down with a stapler. I highly recommend that, well, first of all, I don't like the roofing nails and staples because if you have a good hard wind come through there, it's going to rip that felt right off of a roofing nail and or a staple. What I recommend you do, you can see pictures of this at 24/7, is you tell the roofer or whoever, you can furnish them, if need be, these plastic cap nails that they will install on the felt, or they'll install the felt with these plastic cap nails. And they're going to nail the heck out of it too. They put those plastic cap nails like every 12 inches. And that's going to really hold up that felt and keep it in place real good when
until
they're
you
doing
get
the
the
felt,
shingles up there.
I want you to go ahead and handle flashing that you're going to install in the valleys. Now, you could go with metal flashing, which is very good, or you could do what I do, and I will use what they call it's Weather Shield, I believe it is, by GAF. You can see what I'm talking about at 24/7. And you will go ahead and put this flashing in the valleys. And the reason I want you to do that now is because the felt should go on top of this flashing. And I want you to stress to the roofer that you're not going to put the shingles up right now, so you want them to go ahead and install the valley flashing and different flashing, sidewall flashing. Again, look at 24/7, the graphics and exhibits there. And you want them to install that now because the felt should go on top of that flashing, and you want him to get this roof where if it rains, you will have no leaks at all. Now, when I say no, you may have a few minor leaks, but it's not going to be anything major. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is get in this sidewall flashing, this valley flashing, and then on top of that, they'll put the ideally 30-pound felt. And then that way, your home's going to stay nice and dry until you get the shingles up there. And this is important. As they're finishing up felting the roof, you're going to have a company go out there, and there are separate companies that do this now. And I highly encourage you to put a house wrap on your home, on the exterior sheathing. And the most well-known is Tyvek. Now, there are many other brands out there that builders use. I must admit, though, Tyvek is a very, very good brand. And if you really check into, the quality of these different house wraps, Tyvek is probably one of the best. But even the other ones, if you don't go with Tyvek, if you're needing to save money and go with the other ones, it's better than having no house wrap at all. One reason I want you to deal with these companies, and that's all they do is house wrap, is they will tend to do it closer to how it should be done. I know initially a lot of builders would have the carpenter and different people install the house wrap, and they would not install it correctly. And when you don't install it correctly, to me, you're just almost wasting the money. But house wrap is going to cut down on air infiltration, moisture getting into the home, and I highly recommend you do the house wrap. But I also highly recommend you deal with the subs. That's all they do is house wrap. And if you're going to be bricking the home, especially, what they'll do at the doors and windows, when these companies that install the house wrap, they're subcontractors, they will also put in the window and door sill flashing, and they'll install that, and the house wrap goes over that. So they will install the window and door sill flashing along with the house wrap. When we get into the section on talking about bricking the home, or you would also consider this if you were doing real stonework that's heavy like brick, at the base of the wall, you will flash the base of the wall. You'll find out why later. And that brick will go on top of this flashing. And we normally, most builders now, you could use a metal flashing. Most builders use a heavy gauge vinyl flashing at the base of the wall that the brick starts on or the heavy stone starts on. And ideally, that brick flashing, the house wrap will go on top of it. And so what happens in a lot of cases, the company comes in and does the house wrap, and then the mason comes in, and when he installs the brick flashing, he has to pull up the house wrap at the base of the wall and slide the brick flashing underneath it. And they do a terrible job doing this. Or I've seen some cases where they put the flashing on top of the house wrap, and that's kind of defeating the purpose of the flashing. The flashing at the base of the wall for the brick or heavy stone needs to go underneath the house wrap. So I have found, even if I have to furnish the flashing, I will get with the house wrap subcontractor. They're going to know what I'm talking about. And I'll say, I'll furnish the flashing, but I want you to install the brick flashing on the home. And then after you install it, then you put your house wrap let it lap over the top of it. And, they'll charge you extra for doing this, but it just turns out to be a nicer, neater job if you have them do it. And for those of you that are totally new to the industry, I think when you look at the photos, when you look at the graphics and exhibits, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Before I leave this discussion on house wrap, I want to just point out to you that house wrap is considered what we call a drainage plane, in that behind any veneer on a home, in the perfect world, you've got what they call a drainage plane, so that any water that penetrates through the veneer will hit this plane and it will go down, drain around doors and windows, drain to the base of the wall, and then drain out onto the ground. And so your house wrap acts as a drainage plane. Now, with hard coat stucco, water can penetrate through hard coat stucco, and ideally, instead of it just hitting regular house wrap, they make a house wrap that's kind of corrugated, so that it makes it a lot easier for the water that seeps in behind stucco to drain to the base of the wall. So when you're dealing with your house wrap people, if you know there are areas where you're going to have hard coat stucco, tell them that you would like one of those house wraps that's kind of corrugated, so it drains the water a lot faster behind hard coat stucco. And you only would do this where you have hard. After they complete the house wrap, you can have all your exterior doors and windows delivered to the job site, and they will install your exterior doors and windows. Again, a lot of builders will just have the framer, for example, or the cornice carpenter install the exterior doors and windows. And there's a lot more to installing a door or window than just sticking it up there and nailing it to the house. I mean, it needs to be shimmed and flashed properly and just all kind of different things. For that reason, there are subcontractors out there, that's all they do. They install doors and windows. Now, they may not be the greatest in the world, because if you had a master craftsman doing it, they would charge you too much money, you couldn't afford them. But they are far better than the carpenters, the framer or the cornice carpenter installing them. Nothing against the carpenters, and I'm not saying they can't do it correctly, but for the most part, they're just not geared to do it correctly. And these companies, that's all they do, and they charge you per door, per window, they just do a much nicer, neater job. And if you check with these guys that work for the luxury home builder market, they just know a lot of little tricks to line everything up just nice and neat, so the finished product is really good, even on the interior of the home. One last thing I want to really stress to you about dealing with the window salesman, especially, is if you're in an area where you do have inspectors and inspection departments, one thing that catches blindsides a lot of builders and creates a real problem is they will have a door that does not meet code for egress during like a fire, a safety code. This is part of the International Residential Code. You can look in the book at 24/7 to see what the general requirements are, but your window salesman will know this better than anyone. And so what you want to do is stress to your window salesman to make sure the windows are the correct size, but you need to know this up when you're doing your drawings, because this could affect the size of a window, and you'd rather know it now, not after the rough opening's there. But I just want to go ahead and plant this seed so you are aware of it and you get it handled when they are doing the drawings. But you've got to have a certain size window for egress in case there's a fire in the home in certain rooms, like bedrooms, for example. And a lot of builders will put too small of a window, and the requirements are, you're going to be somewhat surprised. You're going to think, good night, why does it have to be that big? But I guess they anticipate someone pretty heavy trying to get through the window. And the salesman will know the minimum size that you're able to have, and you can ask questions and find out for yourself. But have the salesman verify all the windows meet code, where they're supposed to. Another thing is that if a window is too close to a door, because of the fact someone could walk into a piece of glass, they require that if you're within a certain distance of a door, if you're a certain distance off the floor, or if you're too close to the floor, they require that the glass be tempered glass. Like if you have a large window over a tub, they require that that glass be tempered glass for safety reasons. Your salesman will know this, and you want to make sure this gets handled, and you're not ordering a bunch of doors and windows and you find out they don't meet code, they're not tempered, and that's a real waste of time and money on your part. And the window salesman will know this, can handle it, but you want to stress this to them. A couple of things I want to talk about here. This is a little out of sequence, but I just want to remind you and just plant the seed there so you're aware of it. I highly stress that you have the door and window supplier salesman come in and measure the home, make sure all your rough opening dimensions are correct. Anything that's not correct, you're going to get it repaired with the carpenter. But there is nothing worse than for those doors and windows to show up and those rough openings be wrong. And you will cover things with the salesman if they will label each window, if they will label each door, so that when it comes out to the job site, for example, in the rough opening, he may designate rough opening, he'll mark it with a marker number 1. And then you'll have a door show up marked number 1. And you'll quickly know that that door goes in that rough opening. So ideally they'll label the rough opening and they'll have a corresponding code or number or letter on the door or window. So you can easily know where everything's going. But the reason I want you to have the salesman measure all this stuff is because if there's a mistake, if you did all the measurements and there's a mistake, you're going to eat a door window. And they can turn into a good chunk of money. So if you have the salesman do it and there's a mistake, then the supplier is going to eat it and make the correction. And let me tell you, this happens all the time. Also, you want the salesman, if you have any vents on the home, like in a gable, you can look at 24/7 to see examples of this. But if you have any gable vents, then you're going to have this same company that builds the windows, for example, or the doors. They're going to build the gable vents. And you will have the salesman tell you what size it needs to be, unless your drawings designated a certain size, and then you'll have that salesman measure the rough opening, and they will build that vent according to the rough opening, and they'll deliver it with the doors and windows. When they set the doors, if you're going to have a very nice custom front door, they need to go ahead and set that frame on the wall at this time. You need that frame in so you can brick up to it or run siding or stucco or whatever you're going to do. I don't want that expensive exterior door on the job site at this time. At this time. Now, what they'll do is they will build the door and frame. They can't just put the frame out there and the door not be in it, because things may not work just right. So they'll build the door and frame and they'll come out and install it. But what you want them to do is, after everything is set just right, then remove those expensive exterior doors, that front door especially, with bevel glass and all this stuff. I mean, some of these doors cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Have them remove that door, take it back to their shop, and hang on to it until you're ready for that door. Now, if for some reason you're compelled to lock up the home, or you want to protect it because you're building in the middle of the winter and you just would like to close it up some way, then you could purchase some temporary or dummy doors, and they can install those in that frame. And you may want to talk with the supplier of the doors, if that's the case, where you're not going to leave that expensive door on the job. If they have any dummy or or just cheap doors that they can put in that frame temporarily so you can have the ability to lock up the home and or either close it up for cold weather and stuff like this. But you could cover plastic over the front of that door if your only intent is just to close the house up if it's real cold in the wintertime. Most of your doors now come to the job site with a protection cover over the door seal or threshold, but not always. And if they deliver the door and there's no protection on the door seal, let me tell you, during construction, that seal is going to take a world of abuse. And at the end of construction, when they come back and set your beautiful door and you've got this really beautiful home, you look down and there is that nasty looking seal that got abused and scratched up during the construction of the home. So you'll notice at 24/7, there's a company, for example, you can go online called Protective Products. There's several companies like this, and they sell products that we use in the construction industry to protect areas of the home. And one thing they sell is a real heavy duty vinyl tape that's specifically for, let's say, covering up a seal. And you can buy this vinyl tape and you will tape it on top of the seal. And what it's going to do is protect it during the construction of the home. So at the very end of construction, you can pull this heavy duty tape off, and there you've got your nice, clean, pristine seal that, complements your beautiful exterior door. But again, fortunately, a lot of door manufacturers now will ship the door out with a. Now remember what I said about the interior door. Hopefully you framed the rough opening correctly to do this. But tell who's ever installing your doors that in a given area, an exterior door, you want them to raise it at least 3/4 of an inch, because in that area you're going to be having hardwood flooring or you're going to be having ceramic tile. If you tell them this, and they know what they're doing, and they should if you've hired the right sub, they're going to know exactly what you're talking about, exactly what to do. And then that way, when you install the hardwood flooring or tile, and especially if you have a throw rug on top of it, you can now open the door and there's adequate room without having to cut off the bottom of the door, which to me kind of messes up the integrity of the door as far as that nice seal between the door and the door seal. If your garage is attached to your home, most people will install drywall in the garage. Even if you're going to put up a wainscot of paneling, many times they'll still install drywall in the garage. Naturally, you're not installing the drywall at this point, so you're going to have an exterior door from the garage to the home. I don't want you to deliver that door to the job site at this point in time. It may be part of the original order, but do not deliver it at this time, and do not install it now. You're not going to install it until after the drywall is hung in the garage. These companies that will set your exterior doors and windows, they'll go ahead and do the windows at this time. And one thing I like about dealing with these subcontractors, this is all they do, is they will go in and shim the doors, shim the windows correctly the way they should be shimmed, or they're supposed to. And much better job than just letting the carpenters do this. And they'll go ahead and set all the windows. On your exterior doors, if for some reason you've got a wooden door that has not been primed, then you need to get your painter out there, and you either want to take that door down and store it in a dry place, or you need to get the painter out there and you need to prime and or seal that door as soon as possible. You do not want that raw wood exposed to the weather if you can help it. So if you've got a wooden door, you're not going to take it down, then get the painter out there, if you're going to paint it, that is. And they need to prime that door. If you're going to stain it, then they need to go ahead and stain and seal it if you're going to leave it exposed to the weather. And you want to be sure to prime or seal the top and bottom edges of all your exterior doors. Now you're going to have a carpenter show up on the job that we call the siding and cornice carpenter. It used to be that all rough framing carpenters would do the cornice, but now most rough framing carpenters will not do the cornice, and we deal with a specialized carpenter called the siding and cornice carpenter. If you look in 24/7, you'll see examples of what I mean by the cornice. This is the edge of the roof on a horizontal plane, but the edge of the roof as you go up an angle like on a gable, we refer to this as the rake. Again, look at 24/7 to see what I'm talking about. The siding and cornice carpenter will do both areas. He'll do the cornice and rake, but we don't call him the siding, rake, and cornice carpenter. We just simply call him the siding and cornice carpenter. And technically, it's supposed to be called the rake cornice, but we don't call it the rake cornice. We simply call it the rake. And they will go ahead and construct this cornice and rake, and hopefully you have a good detail on your drawing of how the cornice and rake should be constructed. If you do not have a good detail, then this is a lot of head scratching on exactly how you're going to do this, and it's going to be predicated on the design of your home and the amount of money. But look at the example of a basic cornice at 24/7. And you'll notice that the basic cornice, they will nail a board against the side of the home called a ledger. And then from the ledger out to the end of the rafter, they'll put a board called a lookout. And then on the bottom of the lookout, they'll put a piece of material we call the soffit. Now, it's technically also called the plancier, but I've never seen anybody call it the plancier. Now, you could impress people by walking up and looking up and say, boy, that's a nice looking plancier. But I've never heard anyone call it that. We normally refer to it as a soffit. And then on the end of the rafter, they will have a fascia board. And then up next to the home, they'll have a piece of trim we call the frieze. And this can vary depending on the style and design of your home, and again, how much money you're willing to spend. And the cornice carpenter builds all this. And that lookout board, he's going to be able to utilize a lot of that scrap you held on to for that lookout board that you'll see in the sketch at 24/7. But look at the sketch at 24/7 and you'll see some of the terminology, like at the end of a gable, the cornice makes a slight turn in, and they have several names for it, but the correct name for this is a cornice return. A cornice return. Now, you could go for the cornice. You could go with a vinyl cornice, which I think is nice. You have less maintenance with a vinyl cornice. You don't have as much flexibility with all the decorative stuff with vinyl cornice like you do building out of wood. Now, if you build out of wood, a lot of people, to lower the maintenance costs, they will go with no rot material such as hardy board. I really like hardy board. And hardy board is a little, difficult to work with, and it can be a little bit of a problem. And what I like to use is a product, it may not be quite as good as hardy board, but it's a lot easier on the carpenter. It does a great job, and has an extensive, guarantee, and it's a no-rot material called Miratec. Miratec, and you will see how to get information on Miratec at 24/7. I really like Miratec. Now, Miratec is going to be good for your fascia board, however, and you can use no rot material for any crown molding or something like this. But even if you don't use no rot material, I would get all these other stuff at least pre-primed. It comes to the job already primed. If it's not pre-primed, you're going to need to get your painter out there and prime it as soon as you can. But for the soffit material, Miratec does not make a soffit material, and so for the soffit material, we will use hardy soffit for the soffit material. When we get into the energy section and stuff like this, in the soffit, When we discuss energy information, you're going to notice that one of the most efficient ways to vent your attic, and it's also one of the cheapest, is in your soffit. You will run a continuous soffit vent. And then up on the ridge of the roof, you will have a continuous ridge vent. That is one of the cheapest ways to vent your attic, and it's also one of the most efficient ways to vent your attic, to get moisture and especially heat out of the attic in the summertime. And you also want to vent the attic even in the wintertime to get moisture out. Now, you could go with what we call a ventless attic. I think I mentioned it earlier in the program. I really love a ventless attic. However, the cost to do a ventless attic, in spraying foam up there, we'll talk about this a little more later, will normally, especially on a large home, prohibit you from doing a ventless attic. So if you're not going to go to the expense of creating a ventless attic, and again, we'll talk about this more later, then I highly recommend you have the continuous soffit vent and the continuous ridge vent. Now, those little vents you see builders install, they'll put a little, like a 12 or 16 inch long vent every, 4 feet in the soffit. That is, to me, not worth a flip. You want a vent that runs continuously down the soffit. Now, what we used to do is we would buy vent material and we would build it into the soffit and it would run all the way down the soffit. The thing I really like about the Hardie soffit material is it comes with the vent already punched in it. So when they install the soffit board, the vent is already incorporated in it, and you don't have to install an extra piece of material for a vent. I really like that. Now on the rake, the soffit part of the rake, because on the rake you have the same thing. You have the soffit, the fascia, and the frieze on the rake. On the rake, you don't need to vent the rake, the soffit part of the rake. So Hardie also makes a solid soffit that you will use in that area for the rake soffit. And I can only imagine how confused some of you rookies are. But again, when you go to 24/7, you see the graphics, you see the photos. I think it's going to be clear. And you want to do this cornice before you start any exterior masonry work. Because what the mason will do is he's going to run the masonry work up to the cornice. And so the frieze board, if you'll look and see what the frieze board is, you will adjust the frieze board out from the side of the home in order for the brick or stone to be tucked up underneath the frieze board. So the mason is going to use the frieze board as a guide to come off the brick ledge or footing, whatever he's coming off of, to go up to the cornice. So you need to be conscious of how far that frieze needs to be from the face of the home. Normally, it could be like 5 inches, but it's going to be determined by the thickness of your brick, and you're going to add 1 inch to it because you should have a 1 inch airspace behind the brick. So if your brick is, let's say, 3.5 inches wide and you got a 1 inch airspace, then that frieze board needs to be 4.5 inches away from the face of the home. And the mason will run up behind that. But again, this needs to be done before you start any masonry work. Also, if you've got any raw wood that's part of your cornice and rake, you need to get your painter out there and you need to prime that wood as soon as possible. You do not want that raw wood exposed to the elements if you can help it. One other thing I want to mention while the cornice carpenter is there, and you're going to really need to look at the sketches at 24/7 to see exactly what I'm talking about. If you have a prefab fireplace, on top of the chimney, they're going to put a metal pan. And ideally, that metal pan, they have to have something to nail it to. And so what I want the cornice carpenter to do is on top of the chimney is they're going to put a board up there or a band to give me something to attach the metal pan to. And then we will run any brick or stone or stucco or siding up to that band. But I want you to be aware of it. And if you go to 24/7, I'm going to have some exhibits there explaining what I'm talking about. But if you will tell the cornice carpenter this, they're going to know what we're talking about. And they will go ahead and install this now so you don't have to fool with it later. One reason I wanted you to use the 30-pound felt is because we're not going to install the roofing until they complete the cornice. And the reason why I do that is because on the edge of your roofing, you're going to install what we call a drip edge. Look at 24/7 to see what I mean by metal drip edge. 999 homes out of 1,000 out there do not have a metal drip edge, and you need to have a metal drip edge that runs continuously around the edge of your roof. Unfortunately, a lot of your supply houses like Home Depot, Lowe's, and stuff like this, and even some of the roofing supply houses, I'm so disappointed that the drip edge they have available to sell you is not exactly what I want. At 24/7, I'm going to show you a sketch of the type of drip edge I like to use on the rake, and I like to use on the cornice where you've got a gutter. And what you can do, you can find out in your area where your commercial companies go, some of your commercial roofers. There are sheet metal companies out there that will bill the drip edge for these companies to their design. And it doesn't cost that much money. So if you can't find something close to what I'm going to show you at 24/7 for the metal drip edge, then you can go to one of these companies, give them the design I'm going to give you, and it's also at 24/7, I'll specify the gauge of the metal, have them build it per that design. It doesn't cost that much, and I think you're going to have a much nicer metal drip edge. Take this down, and when you look at the sketches and stuff at 24/7, you'll see what I'm talking about. On the cornice at the bottom of the roof, the drip edge will slide underneath the felt, which has already been installed. On the rake part of the roof, the drip edge actually sits on top of the felt. But this will prevent water from later seeping up underneath your roofing. And it just gives you a good tight roof. Now, the reason I wanted you to wait on the shingles until after the cornice is because a lot of builders will get in and they'll install the shingles immediately, and the cornice carpenter will come in and install the cornice, and all of a sudden there's a gap between the cornice and the last shingle. And it just, in the perfect world, that wouldn't happen. But construction is not perfect. So there may be a significant gap between the edge of the roof decking, let's say, and the fascia of the cornice. Well, if you wait until now to do the roofing, when they put that drip edge up there, that drip edge is going to cover that gap, and then they'll run the shingles down, and it just turns out to be a lot nicer, neater job if they install the shingles after the cornice. So you'll have the roofer out there. Many times the roofer is labor. You will furnish all the material, and they'll complete any flashing that's going on the roof, and they'll install all the shingles. The roofer is also the person that is going to install the ridge vent on the home. Now, on the ridge vent, when the carpenter actually framed the roof, he left a gap at the top. You can look at whatever type of ridge vent you're going to be purchasing, and you can see the requirements for it, but they're going to leave a gap at the top so the air can come up out of the attic and, escape through the ridge vent. Now, even though they left a gap, when they put the felt on the roof, I want them to cover that gap up so that if it rains, it's not raining in the home. When the roofer shows up, what he'll do is he'll cut the felt out of that gap so he can put the ridge vent up there and it'll work properly. And the ridge vents they have now are just wonderful. They used to be real tacky looking, but nowadays they're to the point you can hardly even tell they're up there. And they will actually put shingles on top of the ridge vent. And as I've mentioned, and I'll point out again, this is the cheapest way to vent your attic, and it's one of the most efficient ways also. But the roofer will put the ridge vent up there. If you're hiring the roofer as a subcontractor, then they will furnish the ridge vent. And you may see some recommendations at 24/7 as to the type of ridge vents I like to use. Regarding your shingles, instead of the regular normal 3-tab shingle, a lot of builders will spend the additional money and go to the architectural or dimensional shingle. And understand you're paying more for looks than you are a longer lasting roof. I think your basic 3-tab shingle is a 25-year roof, where your basic dimensional shingle is a 30-year roof. So you're going to be paying quite a bit more money for just 5 more years of warranty. Even though that's the case, I would spend the money for the dimensional shingle because that roof is not perfect. And your standard 3-tab shingle, when you put it up there, if there's any little dips in the roof or little flaws in the roof, it's going to show everything on a standard 3-tab shingle. That dimensional shingle, because of those little tabs and all the shadows it creates, it covers a multitude of flaws on the roof. On the dimensional shingles, they've now even gone to what they call a high definition or an HD shingle, which even has more texture to it, and I really like that look too. So take a look at some of those things, and it's going to be kind of predicated on your pocketbook, but it really just gives you a real nice roof without spending the money for a shake roof or a slate roof or even a metal roof. All these roofs, I love them. They're beautiful, and they cost a lot of money. Your siding and cornice carpenter can also do any siding. Now, years ago, we used to use what was called a hardboard siding, one of the most well-known names being Masonite. But there were names out there that gave the industry a really bad name, like the Louisiana Pacific or LP siding, which ran into a lot of trouble. But I understand that they even came out with class action lawsuits against Masonite siding. I'm telling you, the brick industry is behind the entire thing. There is not one hardboard siding that I can now recommend that you put on your home. So what we'll use on siding, you could use cedar, or you could use cypress, or you could use pine. Or you could use what's becoming very, very popular is your cement fiber siding, the most well-known being Hardie Board. Now, there are other companies that make cement siding out there that would be cheaper than Hardie Board that you may want to look into. You may, I'm not sure, but Miratech may even make a siding for the home that is no rot material. But Hardie Board, that cement fiber, is very, very popular, very, very well known, and a lot of people like it. And I like it too. On all your exterior work, they need to use a galvanized coated nail, and my preference in most cases is a hot dipped galvanized coated nail. If they do not use galvanized nails or galvanized coated nails for all your exterior work, over time, those nails are going to start rusting, and you're going to see rust spots all over your exterior work. Above your doors and windows, especially with siding, rain will blow water against the side of your home, and that water will go down and hit the top of your doors and windows and leak, get in behind there and leak, unless you had the siding carpenter install above the top of your doors and windows. We just simply call flashing or drip flashing. And it's just a little piece of metal they'll put up there above the doors and windows. If they forget this piece of flashing, they'll come back and run a bead of silicone caulking. And even though the caulking is guaranteed for 50 years, it's not going to stick against your home for 50 years. And over time, you're going to have a leak and rotting problem. So make sure you get that flashing above your exterior doors and windows. You'll furnish the material because the siding carpenter is normally labor. By the way, the cornice carpenter is normally labor also, and you'll furnish all the material. So you furnish that piece of metal, and they will put it above the top of your doors and windows, and then on top of that, they put the siding. You've got to be concerned with this flashing also when you do brick or anything, but especially on siding. Again, I want to mention this band on top of your chimney, because if you're doing siding, then this carpenter will probably do siding on the chimney. And when he gets up near the top of the chimney, I want him to put that band up there so that when you install your metal prefab fireplace and they put that metal pan on the top, they've got something to attach the metal pan to. Again, look at the sketch at 24/7 to see how I would construct this if I were you. If you have a combination of any kind of brick or any kind of masonry and siding, I want you to complete all the siding work before you start your exterior brickwork, because they will butt the brickwork or stonework or stucco or whatever up to the siding. So complete all the siding work before you start your exterior brickwork or any kind of masonry work. And one last thing I want to mention before we leave the siding carpenter is that they're going to install the jambs for your garage doors. And on the jambs, and if you've got a brick especially, you want to put brick mold on it. And this jamb and brick mold material needs to be no rot material, such as the Miratec that we discussed earlier in the program. And also, if you're going to install vinyl windows on your home, vinyl windows have a flange around them. And if you're going to brick the home also, the thing you don't want to do is put the brick right up to the vinyl window, because in the future, if you ever have to replace the vinyl window, you'd have to tear out your brickwork. So what you want the siding carpenter to do is on your vinyl windows to put a brick band, a wide brick band around your vinyl windows, so that when you brick up to that band in the future, if you need to replace the window, you won't have any problems. And I think when you kind of see pictures of vinyl windows and stuff like this, you're going to understand what I'm talking about. Let's go ahead and talk about any of your masonry veneer, such as brick, stone, or stucco, and we'll start off talking about brick. And on the brick, you're going to be dealing with a brick mason, which is labor. You will furnish all the material. And remember what I said earlier about dealing with subs. Now, the brick is one area where, even though the mason is charging you, per brick, the mason is notorious about getting out there, and they'll do this low, easy stuff. And they can lay a lot of brick in a day if it's low and easy, not a lot of doors and windows and stuff like this. And technically, you owe them a lot of money. And if you pay them based on what they've done, then they're going to be gone. And to get them back to do these high walls, these high places, they will charge you an arm and a leg, and you have got to pay it. So again, do like I taught you in dealing with the subs, just kind of help them cover their payroll. But the bulk of their money, they're going to have to wait until they're through with this brickwork, and then they'll get that big lump sum of money. I am not going to let them get ahead of me on the money. Also, your bigger and better crews have their own scaffolding. So when you're shopping around and getting price, you want to make sure they do furnish their own scaffolding. Because if they don't have scaffolding, then that would mean you would need to rent the scaffolding, and that would show you the true bottom line price for the mason. But I'm telling you, your bigger and better crews, they have plenty of scaffolding, and the way the market's kind of slow right now, this is not going to be an issue. But when things are really booming, you may be forced into furnishing the scaffolding. I tell you what, when things are really hot, we've furnished limos, tickets, whatever, just to get the mason to the job. And if for some reason you get tricked into furnishing the scaffolding, I want you to make sure your insurance, or you can acquire insurance that would cover that scaffolding. But scaffolding is expensive, and this is an item that will walk off a job site, and you do not want to be stuck with that liability. So I would prefer you not rent the scaffolding, let the mason deal with the crew that has their own scaffolding. Your bigger and better crews, they'll have it. One problem we see in Metro Atlanta that you don't see in other cities like Dallas, Texas, and stuff like this is when they brick the home, they will not cover the windows up, and they'll get all this residue on your windows. And if you're bricking for the first time, you may go out there and you go up to the mason and say, wow, how are we going to get all this junk off the window? And the mason quickly responds, don't worry about it. When we clean the bricks, we'll clean the windows off. Well, when they clean the brick and clean the windows, I'm telling you that glass is going to be scratched. I'm telling you that glass is going to be scratched. And I had a builder friend that spent about $20,000 replacing the glass on the front of one home because he had a very picky customer that wanted to see the sunlight in the morning and didn't want to see a bunch of scratches in her glass, which I can understand. So you need to cover these windows up. And about the easiest thing to do, now Protective Products carries things for covering up the glass, but sometimes it's like a sticky saran wrap. But sometimes this isn't the easiest thing to use if your window has divided lights on it. So the mason, you can just get regular cheap painter's plastic, and the mason can tape this using blue painter's tape. They can tape this around the window frame, and they can cover up the windows before they brick around the window to protect the glass. And you want to do this. And if you furnish the plastic and the tape, the mason should do this, and there should be no additional charge. The masons are also notorious when they get on a high wall, they'll build their scaffolding up. And what they'll do is, before they get up to a window where they have to cover it up with plastic, they will crawl in and out of that window to go through the house, to go up and down, if they need to have a lunch break or go to the porta-toilet or something like this. I don't want them to do that. And this is where you have to be a bad guy and tell the mason, I don't want you going through the house. Not only will they tend to mess up the window, the window jamb, but they will just be tracking, all that grit through the house. I don't want them doing that. So tell them, I'm sorry, but you got to go up and down the scaffolding, not through the house. There may be situations where you just can't help it, but for the most part, you can. They can go up and down the scaffolding, not through the house. When you brick a home, they will deliver all the material out there, such as the brick, naturally. Then you'll have sand. You'll have mortar mix. And another item of material that you should furnish is what we call a wall tie. Versions of wall ties out there. In residential construction, we use just a cheaper wall tie. They're very inexpensive, but you want to make sure you furnish these wall ties, because if you don't furnish them, the mason may not remind you and therefore won't use them. You can look at 24/7 by going to the Brick Association to see how close you put the wall ties together. And what you want to do is kind of snoop around and make sure the mason is using the wall tie. And what it does, they nail the wall tie to the wall, and it will go in between two brick, and it ties the brick to the wall so the brick won't crush into the home or fall away from the home. Because as I told you earlier, and I'll even talk about this more in a few minutes, the brick, you're going to keep it about 1 inch away from the face of the house. and that wall tie ties the brick to the house. But you do want to walk around and just make sure they are using the wall ties. I've seen them nail the wall ties to the wall and just brick right over them and not even turn them into the brick, which is so irritating. So you got to put a little fear in the mason that, listen, I want you to use these wall ties, and if I see you're not using them, I'm going to cut your pay $500. Just put the fear of God in them. But just kind of walk around and just make sure they're doing this. And I tell you, with subs, you can't be there all the time, but they're like a bunch of youngins. I mean, you'll get over here and they'll be messing up, and you'll straighten them out. And then you'll look over here and the other side, they're messing up. You'll run over there and straighten them out. And then you look back to where you were and they're kind of messing up again. And it's frustrating. But if you catch things here, catch things there, threaten them with money if they don't do this or that, I'm telling you, you are going to be way ahead of the game. Let me get off on a little tangent right here. It's so easy in this industry to be a superstar because it doesn't take that much effort to be a superstar. I don't know how many of you know about the game of baseball. I don't mean to bore you with this, but in the game of baseball, if a batter hits the ball 3 times out of 10 hits, 10 times at bat, he's batting 300. If he hits the ball 2 times out of 10 times at bat, he's batting 200. Now, a batter batting 200 is probably going to be gone. They're not going to make it. A player batting 300, they are superstars earning mega bucks. Just one hit in 10 takes you from a nobody to a superstar. The same is true in construction. All it takes to go from mediocre builder to just superstar are just one hit out of 10. Telling that sub, be sure to use those wall ties, walking around, catching what little things you can. You're not going to catch everything. It's impossible. But just those little things you're going to catch will carry you from batting 200 to batting 300. And you're going to look great. You're going to amaze people and impress all your friends and relatives. Above your doors and windows to hold the brick in place, you're going to be ordering and delivering to the job what we call brick lintels. And when they deliver the brick to the job, I want you to cover them up or keep them covered, because if you have a big soaking rain, now you'll naturally cover up your mortar mix, but even on your brick, if you have a hard soaking rain, you don't want that brick to get soaking wet, because that can create a little bit of problems in laying the brick. If the mason is worth their weight, they will cover brick up at the end of the day, or they'll keep the brick covered up during the construction of the home. And remember, I told you, you're going to pay the mason based on the quantity of bricks they will use. And it's very easy to determine how many bricks they use. On Monday, you delivered 10 bundles of brick. You can find out how many brick there are to a bundle. On Friday, there's only 2 bundles remaining. That means they've used 8 bundles of brick. Now, don't pay them for 8 bundles. Of course, you want to hold money back on them. But also, you want to walk around and pick up any whole brick on the ground, not half brick, whole brick. You don't want to pay them for any whole brick laid on the ground. You want to stack it up. So it's very easy to determine how many brick a mason is used. I'm going to stress to you that you deal with a salesman at the brick supply house, and you let that salesman calculate the quantity of brick for your home. They can also measure and calculate all the brick lintels you need. You will see at the construction notes at 24/7 that the longer piece of brick lintel that you use, you'll use a larger size to cover the span. Your brick salesman will know this information, and he can go ahead and order all this And it makes it a lot easier if you get the brick lintels, the mortar, the sand, everything from this one supplier. But one reason I want you to have them measure the brick is because if they measure too much and you've got a bunch of brick left over, they'll come back and pick it up and give you credit. If you measured too much and you have brick left over, a lot of times they will charge you significantly to pick up that excess brick. And I don't want you to get hit with that charge. And that salesman is usually a little bit better on calculating quantities than you would be. He would know things to look for. Another thing that I want you to talk to the salesman about, if you have any arches on the home, instead of having a carpenter or the mason build any arches out of wood, they have products now that we call them like quick arches and speed arches that we use in masonry work. That it does such a wonderful, beautiful, neat job. And you're not wasting all this time and effort building a wooden arch that many times just doesn't work out just great. And it just speeds the process up. The mason loves it and does a nice, neat job. Your brick salesman in that supply house should handle these quick arches or speed arches. They'll know what you're talking about. When you put a brick veneer on your home, or even a real heavy stone veneer that's going to be sitting on a brick ledge, for example, when you put brick against your home, ideally you'll leave a 1-inch gap between, let's say, the house wrap and the brick. In commercial work, we'll actually leave 2 inches, but leave at least a 1-inch gap. One purpose of that gap is that if moisture builds up behind the brick, or rain, hits the brick and rainwater penetrates through the mortar joints or whatever like this, the water that accumulates behind the brick, it will fall down in this gap. It will go down to the base of the wall. And what will happen at the base of the wall, this water would build up during time, and it would create a rotting problem for your home. So what happens at the base of the wall, you have flashing there at the base of the wall, and every so many feet, you're going to put what we call a weep hole. Now, that's what we used to do years ago. We'd leave a little gap in the brick, and we'd call it a weep hole for the water to seep out from behind the brick. What many builders will do now is, instead of leaving a gap in the brick, they'll put a little vinyl tube in there called a weep tube. You can look at 24/7 to see how often you should have this weep hole and or weep tube. It's not the same for either one. I will tell you, I'm not wild about the weep tube for several reasons. I think they can get clogged up pretty easily, and I think insects can crawl up in the tube and get in behind the wall. I'm not wild about the weep tube. One thing I did in commercial work that I do in residential is I will use a weep rope. It's nothing more than a cotton rope, like an old cotton clothesline. Your brick supplier should carry weep rope. It just comes in a long, roll, and the mason will just pull it out, and they can cut it, and it lays in behind the brick at the base of the wall, and then they'll stick it out of the brick and let it hang out of the brick, 2 or 3 inches. The reason I like the weep rope is it doesn't clog up, because moisture, what it does, it wicks the moisture out from behind the wall. Also, if you're dealing in an area where the inspectors are really checking for weep holes and weep tubes, and bear in mind a lot of the inspectors don't even concern themselves with this, but if they are checking it, they can easily see that weep rope sticking out of the wall, so that they won't have any issues with this if you are in those areas where they are checking it. Then when you pass all the inspections and everything is completely done, you can cut off the tip of this rope, and you're going to never notice it. And it's going to do a good job weeping the water out from behind the brick. The weep rope is my recommendation. You will also see this above your doors, your exterior doors and windows, in that as water runs down from behind the brick, when it hits the top of a door or window, you're going to need to have flashing above the top of that door or window. You'll see sketches of it at 24/7. And then so that water can seep out from, that flashing, you're going to have a weep hole, a weep tube, or my preference, a weep rope above the top of that door or window. So go around existing homes now that have brick veneers and see if at the base of the wall or above the top of the door or window, you don't see these little weep holes or weep tubes. You're not going to see many builders doing the weep rope because usually only the commercial builders do that. But you'll see it on my job site. I've had students call me up on their existing home and said, Tom, I went home and I don't have, weep holes or weep tubes, in my brickwork. What should I do? Can I just drill a hole through the joint at that point if there's any water so it can seep out? And I'll tell them, yeah, you could drill a hole and that would allow the water to seep out. But if they don't have any flashing back there, then it's going to still turn into a rotting problem. But what I tell them to do, I'll say, listen, there may or may not be a moisture issue with your brick. This is just to cover the situation where moisture builds up behind the brick. So what I would do is I would just wait it out. And if years go by and you never see any issues with moisture, then just let a sleeping dog lie. If you do see an issue in the future, then it would be necessary to tear the brick out in areas and install flashing and the weep holes to handle this problem. So just let it sit, see if it turns into a problem. And I've been on some job sites and you'd get on the right-hand side of the home and the mason is installing the weep holes or weep tubes or whatever, perfectly. Then you get on the left side of the home and they don't install any of them. I mean, that kind of stuff just drives you crazy. So you got to check and make sure they install all of this stuff. And these weep, bear in mind at the base of the wall, the weep tubes or rope or whatever should be right above grade. You don't want to cover it up. You do not want to cover it up with dirt. They've got to be seen even when the home is completely finished, and some of the inspectors will mandate this, that they can still see them.